My interest in Ayurveda, actually, to be perfectly honest, I didn't have an interest in Ayurveda. I also lived ashram life for about 5 years. And at one point, I was speaking to my guru, and she said, "What are you still doing here, living in the ashram?" And I said, "What do you mean? I live here." And she said, "When are you going to go and do something practical that actually helps humanity?" And so I was quite baffled and surprised at that. And I came back and I said, "Well, what could I do that would help humanity? Because you'll have to tell me. My preference is to just stay here." And she told me, "You should go and study Ayurveda for 5 years." So that's what I did. And I ended up, a dear friend of mine who I knew in the ashram had developed cervical cancer, which was diagnosed very late term. And her prognosis was very poor, that maybe she would live 1 or 2 years with chemotherapy, radiation, and a complete hysterectomy. And she ended up finding my mentor, who's an Ayurvedic physician in Pune, Vaidya Srirang Galgali. And she spent several months with him doing very intensive panchakarma, and she had a remission. And at that point, she knew that I was beginning to study Ayurveda, and she recommended me to him. And so I contacted him, and he doesn't have a large institution or even an educational program, but he took me on in a traditional Gurukula manner, of just kind of as an apprentice and as a disciple. And so I spent then the better part of 5 years in Pune, staying with him, kind of living at his elbow, assisting in surgeries, operations, panchakarma treatments, medicine compounding, and studying from our classical texts. And something that really sets him apart and the tradition that we practice in is we call ourselves Shuddha Ayurveda, which means pure Ayurveda, that we go back to the original texts of Ayurveda, which are over 5,000 years old. And we take these texts very literally, and we use these texts as our principal mechanism or method of navigation. We do not try to translate these different concepts, these different yogic concepts and concepts from the sages into contemporary biomedical terms. Of course, we have to understand biomedical procedures, how allopathic medicine works, what are the effects of pharmaceutical drugs, what are the situations that necessitate pharmaceutical drugs. And of course, surgery and these sorts of things are a part of any medical practice, right, regardless of the tradition. But we really find that the greatest value of Ayurveda is in the perception that it gives us, that it allows us to approach different health problems from a different perspective, and in coming from a different perspective to see different solutions, which are often very simple, very, very simple. And so we really embrace this cosmology of Ayurveda, this understanding of the universe and of our bodies as composed of 5 elements, and navigating every dilemma, every health concern, and also the potential for rarefaction of the human organism and the transformation of this vessel into a vessel for spirituality and consciousness through these fundamental principles of the yogis and of the rishis of ancient Ayurveda. The language of Ayurveda is Sanskrit. And so all of our texts are in Sanskrit. So I had to learn Sanskrit to learn Ayurveda. And anyone that kind of seeks to practice Ayurveda at a clinical level, this capacity in Sanskrit is absolutely essential. And Sanskrit is a very unique language in that it was never a spoken language as such. It was never a common language with which to discourse in the marketplace or in the home. Sanskrit literally means what has been put together. And so it's been put together because this language itself is a transmission. This language itself activates the knowledge. And this language itself is a tool of healing beyond transmission. So to study these classical texts and to understand, to kind of practice these concepts clinically, Sanskrit is essential. Because again, the vibrations of these words and of these shlokas in Sanskrit, they activate different elements within the practitioner, right? They activate different elements within the being. They take us into different realms of experience that through translation you will never get to. And then beyond that, because I lived in Pune for the better part of 5 years, and I was in a part of Pune called Kotrud, which is not like near the city center by any means. It's a very kind of traditional neighborhood that is mostly comprised of Marathi-speaking people, and people that are kind of more indigenous to that area since many, many generations. So the vast majority of those 5 years, no one was speaking English. Marathi was the common currency. So I had to learn a good bit of Marathi just to interface clinically and to interact with my mentor. And one of the things that Ayurveda tells us actually is that if you really know something, you should be able to speak about it for days, and you should also be able to summarize it in a sentence or two. So as far as what is Ayurveda, Ayurveda is like the user's manual to life. It's like the user's manual to your body. When you get a car, when you get a vehicle, that vehicle comes with a user's manual, right? Of what to do if anything goes wrong, what are the things required for maintenance, and to optimize the performance of that vehicle, right? And our bodies are also such vehicles. And we're very fortunate, actually, that we don't have to discover this user's guide, but the ancient sages and rishis who clearly cognized all of these things have recorded their words, and that is the Ayurveda. So the Ayurveda is the user's guide for your own body. As for the relationship between Ayurveda and yoga, yoga is a spiritual pursuit. Yoga is the true meaning of life, right? To merge our consciousness in the supreme consciousness. This is yoga. And there are different methodologies and practices that yoga gives us, and many different traditions of yoga, right, give us different methodologies and different specific practices, different margas, right, as per our own affinity and our strengths and weaknesses. However, as a prerequisite to most of these yogic practices, one needs a baseline, one needs a foundation of physical health. If our physical health is not there, is not online, then it's very difficult to wake up at 3 a.m. to do your sadhana. Right? If you do wake up and you have no energy, it's very difficult to do your kriyas. And if you are tormented by pain and incapacity most of the day, then your attention and your awareness is not, going to these higher centers, and going towards the facilitation of this merger with divine consciousness. One of the words for disease is actually in Sanskrit is sankocha, which means contraction. Like when we have pain and we have illness, we contract into ourselves, right? And we cut off from the greater creation, and we cut off from the divine. And so Ayurveda secures the foundation. Ayurveda is not a spiritual path, right? Ayurveda is not a spiritual path. It's not a religion. And doing the injunctions of Ayurveda is also not going to bring you enlightenment. But Ayurveda is what allows you to maintain this foundation, to have good soil in your garden so that the seeds of spirituality and the seeds of yoga can sprout and can bloom and can release their fragrance. So these two are very intimately related, that Ayurveda is what facilitates yoga. In today's society, even with the grace of the Guru, even with, having some foundation of sadhana, there is such a strong momentum towards entropy and decay. There's such a strong momentum to just look at your phone all day. There's such a strong momentum to become lost in Netflix, right? One episode immediately follows the next. If we go with the general flow of civilization and society, that general flow goes towards disease, it goes towards anxiety, it goes towards depression, but you'll be normal as these things are increasingly normal. And to make a change, knowledge isn't enough. to know that something is good for you, to know that something will help you. Today, it's not enough because there's such a deluge of other data and material that it's hard to step out of. And so this knowledge has to be coupled with experience. It has to be deeply rooted with viscerality. The knowledge has to get into your cells, has to get into your bones. And so there's a need, more than ever, for immersion, for retreat, especially for the purpose of learning new knowledge systems, of setting new patterns, of learning new sadhanas. And so in Anandpur Sahib, we'll have a beautiful opportunity not only to learn about Ayurveda, but to experience Ayurveda, to give ourselves a window to experience what a daily rhythm is like, as per the injunctions of the ancient sages and yogis, what a weekly rhythm is like, and to learn all kinds of practical tools and materials with which to address the common challenges of life, and to really, again, to turn good soil and to create a good foundation for sadhana and for yoga. I think, my first real kind of exposure or connection with Sikhi was in Haridwar in about, I think it was probably 2010 or 11. And there was a Gurudwara that was dedicated to Baba Siri Chand. And for whatever reason, I was attracted to this image of Baba Siri Chand that I saw in Haridwar. And I went into this Gurudwara and sat for some time. And I just developed a great kind of love and admiration for Baba Siri Chand. And even within the Sanatana Dharma, that is my background, I was always more attracted to the yogic practices rather than to anything else. And so with my initial exposure to Sikhi also, it was to like one of the great yogis of Sikhi, Baba Siri Chand. And then, by course of fate, and nothing happens by coincidence, I ended up in New Mexico for a number of life circumstances, and also because in New Mexico, there are very special provisions in the state medical laws to allow for the practice of Ayurveda, much more so than any of the other states in the United States, in the US. New Mexico is the greatest legal environment within which to practice Ayurveda. And it's a big state, but a small state also. It is a great land, but a small village. And so definitely the Siri Singh Sahib made a big splash here. And it is hard to go very far without seeing some amsa or some vestige of the legacy that he's created here. And so it wasn't very long at all before some of the people of the community came into my practice. And again, I think this is the same fundamental principle, even with great sadhana and a great practice of yoga, different unfortunate events still happen to everyone in life. Health events still happen, which can cripple those practices. And so in that way, different members of the 3HO community were coming to me for physical support to deal with different, adversities they had suffered with their health. And that was it. That, in this day and age of ever-increasing materialism, ever-increasing consumerism, and really ever-increasing kind of secularism, right? Whatever our specific tradition, those of us that have, seen and felt the spark of spirituality, it's more incumbent than ever that we walk together because the capacity for Sangam, is less and less. So when we recognize a spiritual being, definitely we have to salute that spiritual being and, in whatever way, walk together. In my practice, in the last several years, to my great surprise, okay, I have more and more evangelists and Southern Baptists and, very ardent Christians because they feel unserved and they feel betrayed by the direction that modern medicine has taken, and they don't feel any acknowledgement of their spirit and of the divine. And even though I come from a Hindu yogic background and practiced, something that for most Americans is as affable as Chinese, Ayurveda, all of these, very devout and traditional Christians are flooding into our practice now. and I am so surprised to find them to be actually very good company. Absolutely. One of the things that my guru always said was that, it is not enough to flower. You have to become like a great tree, right? That a tree, its roots reach deep, its roots reach deep to connect to source. And from that connection to source, it grows big. And in growing big, it not just becomes big for itself, but it is able to provide shade and refuge to so many other beings. And for me, this journey with Ayurveda is both a personal journey and a professional journey, a clinical journey. And of course, clinically, there is a lot that we're able to offer, a lot of diseases that we're able to turn around, a lot of cycles of chronic pain that we're able to break, and a lot of lifespans that we're able to increase. But far more than that, this Ayurveda expresses like a tree of refuge just simply in the space of hello. That when you go to the grocery store or when you walk down the street, if you are connected to life and life is really pulsing through you, if your pranas are aligned, then there's a spark in your eye and people see that. And simply seeing that, simply being in the presence of someone who breathes deep. And I'm not saying someone that's enlightened, that's not me for sure, right? But simply someone who breathes deeply, people notice. And there is an osmotic effect. There is an osmotic impact that taking a step and saying hello can be the opening of a door for people and can be an activation for people. And I would say, especially in the family environment, this is very interesting. And perhaps the greatest example that for me in my family, I made a point not to proselytize Ayurveda to any of my family members, not to tell any of them, you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. This is only a means of creating conflict. But in doing it myself and in changing myself with patience, after years of them observing that in me, they also come to it. And they are also interested because they see the results and they're attracted to the results, not the words. Well, I think I saw you up at the ranch and had brought my mother. Yeah, and she was actually, that was an amazing story. I can only say it because she's my mom. But yeah, she was actually, she's very stubborn. And I'd say that she's probably the last person in my family that ever came to me for any sort of help. And she had 7 prolapsed and herniated discs. And she was recommended to go for complete spinal fusion. And so faced with that, she was filled with enough terror and humility to ask me if there was anything we could do or that Ayurveda could do. And so she came for quite an intensive treatment. She came for almost 4 weeks of panchakarma. And after those 4 weeks, she was able to walk such that we came to the ranch and you met her. She couldn't walk when she arrived. And, that was several years ago and she still hasn't had any need for surgery. Well, again, we all have every system has its limitations and every system has its uses.
Right.
I had a patient yesterday who was having a cardiac arrhythmia and some other relatively mild heart problems, right? And simply by these test results, the cardiologist so actually, like, inserting a camera through the femoral artery all the way into the heart just to see everything that's going on, right? The potential side effects of such a scope it could be quite severe, and the nature of it is incredibly invasive, right? And from an Ayurvedic perspective, she has interrupted sleep. She doesn't sleep more than 2-3 hours at a time, right? And there are a number of other problems. And so from our perspective, I said, listen, if you're not sleeping, how can you expect that your heart is going to function with consistency? If it's possible, wait just 2 months. And if we're able to do some simple things just through lifestyle and herbs, simple, non-invasive, this is a low level of commitment, and a low level of financial cost. If I guarantee you that if your sleep is corrected within 2 months, this arrhythmia is gone. And that's for sure. It will be resolved. So but this is one of the ills of, I don't want to say it is a weakness of modern medicine. It's not true, actually. It's a weakness of contemporary perception. It's a weakness of reductionist thinking. And that's different from the modern medicine. We have to be clear. Modern medicine has many beauties and many great gifts to give. Right? But Ayurveda expands this perception. It looks at other elements of causality beyond simply the symptom and the effect, right? There is an effect of cardiac arrhythmia. Before doing a scope, look at the things in that person's life and in their day-to-day experience that may be causative for that. Whether it's your health, your finances, your legal situation, etc. We can go to all kinds of experts. You can go to doctors, financial advisors, accountants, lawyers, but none of them have the vested interest that you do in the results that come from these things. And none of them have the capacity to set these things in order or to correct these things for you. They can only give advice, but the responsibility lies 100% with each of us. I have a bit of legal experience as well, unfortunately, realms of life. And, the lawyer will arrive and go to court with you, but every moment in between, you're on your own. And it's not the greater momentum and the greater results that are had in anything is from how we do everything. How we manage each moment and each day. Part of the essence of what Ayurveda is it is an open source code for health empowerment. And so it offers perspectives of lifestyle management and also a great amount of tools for self-diagnosis, that when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror about to brush your teeth, there is an infinite amount of data being reflected back to you on the state of your health and where your health is going. So a great amount of what we'll explore together is how to make use of this reflection, how to harness this data that your body is revealing to you constantly, and how to respond to that. What are the simple adjustments that can be made in a day or in a week or in a season based on the feedback that your body is giving you, right? That we can come into balance before going to the doctor, before taking a medication. What are the simple ways in which we can adjust the tal, the rhythm of our day? What are the simple ways that we can adjust our food choices? What are the simple remedies that we can reach for that are ubiquitously available? And how can we share this not just with ourselves, but also with our family members and our immediate community to create a greater health and vibrancy that gives us sovereignty and autonomy in our own bodies and in our own health. So during our time together, we will learn a lot of material, go through a lot of knowledge through vocal exchange, through lectures. But one of the beauties of having a retreat environment is that every day we'll be able to take those principles and take that knowledge and apply it into our surroundings and apply it into our lives. How to apply it into the kitchen, not just to understand conceptually what foods are good for different remedies and ailments, what diets are most amenable to different seasons and locales, but how do we make these foods? What do they smell like? What do they taste like? We'll reap all of these experiences. When we learn about basic remedies, we'll take that knowledge off of the book and outside of the lecture hall, and we'll explore how nature is providing opportunities for healing, through every hill and valley. How to identify herbs, how to start to understand what the herbs that are growing in anyone's backyard or even popping up through the cracks in the sidewalk, how these can be used, and how through our five senses, through touch, through sight, through taste, through smell, etc., we can take any herb, even not knowing what it is, and gain a basic understanding of what healing actions it might offer. But even taking like the fresh leaves of marijuana, which don't contain any THC, and before it's flowering, this is a wonderful this can be a wonderful poultice for cuts and for wounds. You can take the roots of marijuana and you can use this as a tea for diarrhea or dysentery. The seeds are very good vermicidal. They're very good for parasites and all of this sort of thing. If we look at modern behavioral theory and the ever-increasing science of learning, one of the things that both of these are revealing more and more is the importance of set and setting for imbibing knowledge, for learning and acquisition. And we have such an amazing opportunity to study Ayurveda together in India and in Anandpur Sahib, because this environment has been charged for thousands of years, and in all likelihood, maybe more than that, with this knowledge and with this wisdom and with this yoga. Every stone has that vibration and creates an ideal container, an ideal foundation for the seeds of this knowledge to really penetrate and germinate and sprout. Yeah, and it's so interesting. I mean, more and more, linguistic anthropology is starting to suggest that this kind of sacred language is actually precedes conventional spoken language. That people were able to functionally communicate through gesticulation, for a long time. And that when people first started vocalizing and using, the voice apparatus, it was much more for the purpose of praise and for the purpose of kind of like celebration and exaltation than for kind of direct communication.
Oh, really interesting.
Yeah. And there's actually a lot to suggest that we were actually making instruments and making music long before we were speaking. We can go into in the retreat a little bit when we go, like in the first days when we do like theory and background. There's this important concept. It's a little higher level, but we can touch it because it will be relevant, called dravyodpati, which is the mechanism of creation. And the idea is that kind of consciousness continually densifies, right? And in that process of condensation into matter, there's a lot of kind of higher steps. But as we get down, there's what are called tanmatras, which are these sensory potentials for manifestation. And the first of those is the capacity to hear and to resonate, right? And so what moves through that field patterns all of the subsequent elements. So the air, the fire, the water, and the earth, they're all patterned by the sound and by the space. The sound and the space is what sets up the blueprint, what sets up the code for the manifestation of all the others.